And I will also share my screen, just a couple of slides, and then I'll pass it over to Adam. So sorry, many windows at the same time, so we should be able to do that. Sorry, everyone, just 1 second. Right. Okay, can you all see my screen? Is everything clear for everyone? Ooh, awesome. Great. So thank you very much, everyone, for being here. It's a pleasure to have you all joining us for the third book interview from the Bristol Hub. And yeah, it's been successful so far every time that we did this session. And yeah, thank you all again for being here. And thanks, Adam, for accepting to have this interview with us. It's a pleasure to first have read the book and now being able to talk to you. I was saying to some people previously that it's a privilege to be being able to read the book and then talking to the authors and then discovering layers that we can't really find during or reading the book, right? So it's a pleasure to have you here. And yeah, before we get started, just to share a bit about the Bristol Hub. We are, this is the core team, the people who structure this hub and make it happen, make these events happening. So I am Yasmin, your host today. And we have Carl, who is helping us today with the chat and other functions in the Zoom. So thank you very much, Carl, for being here and supporting supporting this event. Then in the team, we have also James, Hannah, and Ned, who are very important part of this hub. So thank you for this great team together. Yeah, we put these events together and much more. So yeah, we are one of the many location hubs that are in the SI, the Systems Innovation Network. And I really recommend you to check out all these other hubs um, that are out there. We have also thematic hubs, so spaces to talk and do systems innovation in location and in thematic areas. So yeah, please check the Systems Innovation Network website for more of this information because there's a lot to discover. And yeah, so just jumping into the event, just a quick introduction from about our speaker today, Adam Kahane. Adam is the Director of Reos Partner, an internationally renowned facilitator of complex and conflictual multi-stakeholder processes, and a best-selling author of 6 books on this work. He has worked in more than 50 countries in every part of the world with executives and politicians, generals, civil servants, community activists, you name it. He's been there. He's a member of the Order of Canada, and in 2022, he was named a Schwab Foundation Social Innovation Thought Leader of the Year at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Thank you very much, Adam, for being here again. And yeah, today we're talking about his book, The Everyday Habits for Transforming Systems, that I had a pleasure to read. And yeah, very good read, this book. So really recommend, if you haven't got the book, please do. So just a general agenda for us today. Yeah, this introduction that is now taking 5 minutes. We're gonna pass it over to Adam for a quick presentation of the book. Then I'm gonna make some questions here for other 20 minutes, and then I'll open up the floor for everyone in the room to address their own comments and questions. So make sure to use the chat, but we're also going to give the space for you to unmute yourselves and talk during that time. And then final last minutes for a wrap up and next steps on the Bristol Hub. Right? And now, really last thing that I want to say is that this event is being recorded and is going to be available in the Systems Innovation Bristol Hub YouTube channel that I will share the link with you afterwards. Our chat function is going to be available throughout the session, so make sure you use it well. Please mute yourselves if you're not speaking, just for the good audio experience of the session, but please don't hesitate to put your hands up and unmute yourselves to address any comments and questions. So now I will stop right there and over to Adam.
Thank you. Thank you, Yasmin and Carl. I've had a little bit of contact with SI over the years, and I found these to be very lovely conversations. So thanks for inviting me back again. I'm just trying to think about the right way to start. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to the conversation. And a few of you I know, but most of you I don't know. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. I'm going to show a few slides. It's all material that's in the book, but maybe give us a common reference. So does that show properly, Yasmin?
Yes,
Yeah.
great.
Okay. So I finished this book last August, and because, of course, a book takes a long time from the time the manuscript is finished to the time the book is available. And I've spent the 6 months since August, mostly in South Africa, where I live part of the year. So hello to South African colleagues. And working on another book, which is a second edition of the book Collaborating with the Enemy, which will come out in November. And I mention that because Collaborating with the Enemy is a double click on chapter 6 of this book, which is called Collaborating with Unlike Others. But the reason I'm saying that is because I have spent a good part of the last 2 years writing these two books. And so when I finished the writing and when this book was published in April, and I started to present it, I had the experience of presenting a text in a new context, or I should say multiple new contexts. And so I've been paying a lot of attention to, less to what I'm saying because I already knew what I thought, but in the conversations with readers, which is why I said twice that I'm looking forward to the conversation with you. And the other reason I'm happy about today, sorry, I'm now remembering what I wanted to say before, is in a way, the book is directed to you. That's to say, SI people more than anybody. Because the basic question the book asks is, if we're trying to contribute to transforming systems, which obviously is a collective activity, what can each of us do, not every few years, but every day as part of that? So the point of the book is not that we change systems by ourselves. Obviously, that's not true, but that we have to each do something. So how do we each know what to do? And the book doesn't give any answers at all about what you should do. I have no idea what any of you should do, really. But the book offers a ordinary and practical everyday way for each of you to discover what you can and must do in your particular situation. So I've presented this book now many times, both online and in person over the past 2 months, but it's directed to to SI people more than any. So somebody pointed out to me that the tone of the book is that systems take a long time to be built. They take a long time to change. They often seem solid and stable and smooth, but they're not. And I think one of the gifts of the current time we're living in is it's now completely obvious that the systems we're in are not solid and unchangeable. In fact, they're fluid and changeable. And I'm talking here about all kinds of systems: social, political, economic, food, health, transport, local, national, global. And we all hear the signs or the sounds of systems being transformed, creaking, cracking, new ones being constructed, system boundaries, institutions, rules, relationships in flux. And much of this change is being produced violently through imposing and forcing and bullying and bombing. As I've been talking about this book the last few months, this text in the current context, I've discovered that there's speaking generally, there's three perspectives people have. Some people hold more than one perspective. They all make sense. They're all legitimate, but they're not the same. One perspective I hear is people feeling terrified by all these new things that are happening and fearful for their lives and the lives of their loved ones. A second perspective I hear is people being outraged that other people think this is new. Don't they realize that we've been subjected to these kinds of violent transformations for decades, if not centuries? And thirdly, overlapping with the other two, is some people feel energized that things are changing and they may be difficult, but there's an opportunity to do things that there wasn't an opportunity to do previously. And everybody I meet in all of these in-person presentations, and I've presented in South Africa and throughout Europe and the last few weeks throughout Canada, everybody is asking himself the same question, which is, what can I do? And in particular, what can I do to contribute to transforming systems non-violently? And that's the question the book asks, and that I'm going to cover in this presentation. Okay. So I'm just going to show 6 slides. And as I say, practically all of this material is in the book. I want to give just one example. So, I'm giving it as a well-known example, what happened in South Africa between 1984, between the 80s and the 90s. It's an example of a system having been transformed from apartheid to democracy, incompletely, imperfectly. Lived in South Africa for 30 years, so I know about incompleteness and imperfection. But I use this example because it's important. It's the last liberation of a big country from racist colonialism. It's well known. It was mostly peaceful. It's how I got started in doing the work I've been doing for 30 years. And by coincidence, it's how I got started on writing this book. And the only point I want to make about this, which I think is important, is we might think that a system transformation like this happens all of a sudden in 1994, there's a democratic government. But it was the result of many people doing many things over many years. In fact, the African National Congress, Nelson Mandela's party, was founded in 1912. So domestic resistance campaigns, moral persuasion, armed struggle, international boycott and divestment campaigns, constitutional negotiations, a referendum, an election, all of these things contributed to the transformation. And I got involved in South Africa in 1991. I was living in London. I was invited because of a methodological expertise I had in what's called scenario planning to facilitate a group in South Africa at the Montfleur Conference Center. It became known as the Montfleur Scenario Exercise outside of Cape Town. The remarkable thing about this exercise is it included leaders from across South African society, Black and white, men and women, opposition and establishment, left and right, politicians, business people, trade unionists, community leaders, academics. And the main thing that stays with me from that experience, other than the remarkable working with such a remarkable group of leaders, is that people came not because they were certain that this was going to make a difference, but because they realized that things were changing. They had an opportunity to shape the way they changed, and they didn't want to miss it, even though they didn't know for sure whether it would work. And that's how I discovered my vocation as a facilitator. I ended up quitting my job in London, emigrating to South Africa, marrying the project organizer, starting to do this work. The usual story. One of the people in this workshop was a man, I guess the South Africans on the call know his name, other people won't, a man named Trevor Manuel, who at the time was the head of the economics department of the African National Congress, the ANC. He'd been a very important activist in the country. He'd been in prison. He'd been prominent leader of the United Democratic Front. Now the ANC had been unbanned when Mandela was released from prison in 1990. And this process was right in the middle of the transformation, which almost nobody imagined could be successful or peaceful, and it was, mostly. And Trevor went on to join the government. When Mandela was elected, he became the Minister of Finance, a position he served in for 13 years, very important position in a parliamentary system like South Africa. He was the longest serving finance minister in the world, started up the National Planning Commission, became a business person. So he knows a lot about system transformation, not from the outside like me as a facilitator or a consultant, as a foreigner, but upfront, day in, day out. And when my previous book was published in 1991, the book that I discussed in a previous session with SI, I suppose it's in your video library, I had this idea of interviewing a few people who I thought were brilliant facilitators in a broad sense of the word. So I conducted 3 30-minute, half-hour live interviews, online interviews, with Trevor Manuel, with Christiana Figueres, who had been the Secretary General of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change leading up to the Paris Agreement, and Juan Manuel Santos, who had been president of Colombia and who I've worked with a little bit for a long time, and who got the Nobel Peace Prize in 2016 for agreeing a peace treaty with the FARC guerrilla army. And my first interview with Trevor was with Trevor, and it was a complete disaster. Really, sorry. I'm sorry. I've mixed up my Spanish and my English slides. So I'm just going to fix this because this could be a little confusing for those of you. Sorry, I'm giving a presentation in Spanish after this, or at least with Spanish slides. So let me. What happens when you give so many presentations in different languages?
Sure, Spanish speakers in here are very grateful to hear that.
Okay. Sorry. It's not only in Spanish, it's to Chilean Spanish people, and that's a whole other thing, as Yasmin knows. Sorry about that. So it was a disastrous interview because Trevor and I looked at this question about how do you contribute to system transformation in a completely different way. And I kept interrupting him to say, don't you mean what I'm saying? And he kept saying, no, that's not what I mean. As after the half hour was over, I got messages from my colleagues, my wife saying, terrible interviewer, don't quit your day job. It was all very embarrassing, but also confusing. I didn't understand what it was that I was missing. What was it that was so obvious to Trevor that wasn't obvious to me? And that was the impetus for writing this book, because I realized there's something Trevor understood about transforming systems that I didn't. And I wanted to try to understand that. And I thought maybe other people would also want to understand it. So this was the impetus for writing this book. And this is the key paragraph in the interview. If I go back at it, in the morning we would be with a group of business leaders in affluent area, and in the afternoon at a university campus with some radical students, and in the evening at a poor community. Then at night we'd work with groupings in the ANC. So this focus on this day in, day out process of engagement, and I'll come back to how I came to understand that. Anyhow, I interviewed him, Cristiana Figueres, Juan Manuel Santos, other people who you'll see in the book, and also worked with about 300 other people in this book creating club. At least one of you, TY, maybe others, sorry if I didn't catch who was here, were members of that. And unlike my other books, this is a book that was not written primarily from my own experience, but
Sorry, Adam, you're not sharing your screen at the moment. If you
I'm
are.
sorry. I'm very sorry. Yes, it threw me off to sorry. Luckily, you didn't miss anything. Sorry. This is the slide I wanted to show. Thank you for letting me know. You see it now, right? Okay, sorry about that. Anyhow, and the habit, so the challenge of writing the book was what can you say about a small number of habits which is fresh and true and useful, not a straightforward task. I'm happy with what we came up with, not because we invented something, but because we have discovered and articulated something that at least some of which will be familiar to those of you who do this work every day. So I'm going to just summarize it in the content in 3 slides, and then we can go. So this is the core of the book. The book is very simple: introduction, 7 chapters, conclusion. This is what we came. Each chapter is based on an interview with one person, and act responsibly, not just doing what's expected of us or whatever we like, based on interview with a First Nations medical doctor in Canada, and based on this idea, as Bill Torbert said to me years ago, it's the key point about the expression. This expression, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem, isn't the key point. The key point is if you're not part of the problem, you can't be part of the solution. If you can't see how what you're doing or not doing is contributing to the way things being as they are, you won't be able to do anything about it except from the outside by force. This is a very hard lesson for facilitators and consultants to learn. Relating in 3 dimensions, it's a complicated chapter. It's the one based on the interview with Cristiana Figueres, and it just makes the point, which is that we can think of others as actors, parts of larger wholes. We can think of others as wholes in themselves, parties, and we can think of others as wholes in relation to one another, relatives. And most people tend to focus on 1 or 2 of these ways of relating with others, but all 3 are necessary to be able to affect system transformation peacefully. Looking for what's unseen, not just seeing what we always see. That almost always requires talking to people in different positions with different perspectives. Working with cracks. We might think that a system is solid and stable and smooth, but if we get up close to it, it's always moving, always cracking, with things breaking through and breaking down. And the key is to, unless you want to dynamite the system, we're seeing a lot of dynamiting of systems these days, but if you want to contribute to systems transformation peacefully, then you need to work with the cracks. And the best analogy of this is a rock climber doesn't climb a rock, they climb the cracks in a rock. It's the cracks that now allow them to move forward, where they put their toes and their fingers. Experimenting a way forward, this idea of trying stuff out, not just doing what's familiar or safe, collaborating with unlike others, not just people we like or who are like us. This has really been the core of my work and Reos Partners' work for the past 35 years. What does it mean to collaborate with people who are different, across difference, people we might not agree with or like or trust? And that's what I referred to when I said that my the book I've just finished, which is coming out in November, Collaborating with the Enemy, How to Work with People You Don't Agree With or Like or Trust, is a double click on chapter 6. And chapter 7, which many people find helpful and reassuring, is that system transformation is almost always a long job. So don't think we can sprint through it, or just that we can keep going until we burn out. Not healthy. So I'll just show 2 more slides. The underlying idea of the book is, most of the book is about 7 habits, but what I realized in presenting the book is that there's an underlying habit or approach or stance, or you could even say way of being, which I call radical engagement, using these dictionary definitions, taking part in, entering into conflict with, and radical, not meaning extreme, but going to the roots. And the shift in radical engagement is away from dealing with the situation and with other people, distractedly resigned, knowing it all, hierarchically, at arm's length, with arms crossed, superficially, impatiently, saying you take it or leave it, towards engaging alertly with hope and curiosity, horizontally leaning forward, hands-on, digging deep, persisting, and above all, reciprocally and relationally. And this is what Trevor Manuel was trying to tell me that I didn't understand. He was referring to a particular way of engaging day in, day out. Okay. And then the last slide, the drawings in my book, including this one, are by my eldest granddaughter, Siobhan Wilkinson. And this is the title of the conclusion, Begin Anywhere. And what I notice, especially in the current context, is many people are feeling overwhelmed and frightened, even paralyzed. And many people are in a difficult situation, even life-threatening situation. But if we assume that in order to move forward, we have to agree on the solution, the problem, the plan, values, then we make a difficult situation impossible. And what I realize the most important message of the book is that if we're going to make it less impossible, more possible, we don't have to know everything before we start. We don't all have to work on everything. We don't all have to work on one thing. We don't have to agree with other people on the solution, the plan, values. We don't have to wait for other people to do what we want them to do. We can begin anywhere, and every step at every scale by every one of us can make a valuable contribution. And so just to finish, I'm from Montreal, and the rule about giving a webinar or a speech if you're from Montreal is you have to quote Leonard Cohen at least once, if not several times. And of course, he has a song about this, or the refrain of his song Anthem that you may have heard. That was in the back of my mind when I started to work on this. He says, there's a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in. But in presenting the book, I realized that the 2 sentences before may be even more important. He says, ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And especially in a situation where many of us don't know what we can do, to realize that there are bells that still can ring, that each of us is close to some bell or bells. They may not be obvious. They may have to be found. They may have to be discovered. Radical engagement is how we discover what we can do, what bells we can ring, what cracks are in front of us. But the requirement for that is to forget your perfect offering, forget the idea that the group has to be perfect, or the time has to be perfect, or you have to be perfect. It's not going to work. Beginning anywhere requires forgetting your perfect offering. So that's the summary. I really look forward to the conversation.
Great. Thank you very much, Adam. Yeah, as I was reading the book, I had to read and come back and read again, because I could really just feel the challenge, right? It's very difficult to it's easy to just say you aren't part of doing this and that, but it's very difficult to see yourself as an everyday habit of doing something, right? And that takes a lot of time and commitment, and this is definitely difficult to be achieved. So I had to go to the book loads of times and trying to stop, breathe, and not, wow, it's always a work in progress, isn't it? And try to go back. And so it is very important first to give, at least for me as reading, it's important to give that reassurance that there is something that you can do every day, but it's also not to overwhelm yourself with doing everything every day, because of course the seventh habit is to rest and take your time and trying to understand what is needed for the times that you are involved in. At least that's how I understood. So it is very thought-provoking generally, and yeah, I will definitely go back to it more time uh yeah, in the future, to just remind myself of the habits and putting some track in the process. Yeah, so it's very, very good. Thank you for that, Adam. And yeah, I think my first question is, well, as you mentioned, Ryan, I think a lot of people would agree is that it's challenging in doing this every day. Some days you have more energy, and some days you have less energy. Some days you are with more people, other days you are with less people, and this dynamic is very challenging generally. And there is a part of the book that you you say that you struggle with some of these still to this day, and it would be at least interesting to hear from your perspective. Why do you think some of these are more challenging for you than others, and what are some ways to overcome some of the barriers that can arise during the process?
Thanks, Yasmin, and thanks also for your careful reading. Um, one of the reasons I like to talk about this in groups is I think different people find different ones of these easy or difficult, and so we can help each other also. It might be something that I find difficult or confusing, you are good at for whatever reason, and vice versa. So helping each other is important. There are also 7 aspects of the same underlying idea, which is this idea of radical engagement. And I didn't intend to write a philosophical or theological text, but I think this idea of radical engagement goes about as deep as you want to go. What does it mean to be with rather than apart from? Sorry, I'm going to keep referring to collaborating with the enemy because that's where my head's been the past 8 months. But I introduced a new word in collaborating with the enemy in the new edition, and a book, and a word that's not in this book, which is the word abiding, abiding. It's a helpful word in part because it's not used very often, so it doesn't have a lot of connotations. I've written a lot about power, love, and justice, and one of the difficulties writing about power, love, and justice, everybody has a different idea about what the word means. But this idea of abiding, being with rather than apart from, remain or dwell. So there is that, I think, underlying idea, and it's the opposite of I know everything. If you would just listen to me and do what I say, then everything would be fine. It's the opposite of that. So it is, in a certain basic sense, a humble stance, or at least a stance that recognizes there's other human beings here who have their own perspectives and positions and powers, and almost everything requires working with others. So sorry, that's to answer your question more directly. So I said that just to explain why it's not like you read a list, you practice for a week, and then you've got it. It's not I wouldn't say it's a technical skill, it's a way of being. And I'm 64, and I feel I'm just getting warmed up. So that said, some of them are more familiar to me. Collaborating with unlike others, collaborating across difference, collaborating with the enemy is something I've worked on professionally for decades. I've written about it. I've rewritten about it. I understand it. I think I understand it pretty well. I find it difficult, but I really understand it well. And even in my difficulty, I can go back and say, "Oh, okay, that's what I said on page 47, and I better really try to do that." Similarly, looking for what's unseen, or more specifically, looking for what I'm not seeing, is something I have a lot of practice at. It's always difficult to see what you're not seeing, but the way to do it is pretty straightforward. You talk to somebody who's seeing something different, or is in a different position and has a different perspective, and you say, "What do you see here?" And or you don't have to ask them; they tell you, "How come you're not seeing X?" And I get that all the time, and you know, I'm I'm always a little, agitated or even upset or angry at that situation, but I get it. It's happened to me hundreds of times. I know, okay, good, pause. What am I missing here? What do I need to do next? Um, I found the number one, acting responsibly, to be really challenging. It's not an unusual idea. I don't tend to think a lot about moral or ethical issues. I, I consider I'm in many ways a practical or pragmatic person. And acting responsibly is essentially a moral question, and it's not a straightforward moral question. I have no idea what is acting responsible for you, Yasmin. I barely know what it means for me. I have different roles in different systems. Is it acting responsibly as a husband or a father or a writer or a business consultant, or as a Canadian or as a Jew? These are all different perspectives. And as I said, that chapter was based on a conversation with Dr. Marcia Anderson. And by coincidence, I was with Marcia Anderson a few weeks ago in Winnipeg. And I said, I wrote this chapter based on my interview with you, but how do you know what acting responsibly is? She had used the phrase all my relations, which is a very well-known First Nations or Native American expression. It means reminding yourself that you're related to all living things. I said, how do you do that? And she had a very helpful answer. She said, well, it involves trade-offs, Adam. That's really important, that if I act responsibly in one way, I'm probably ignoring something else, or I'm supporting this, which means hurting this, and it involves trade-offs. So I find that important and difficult. And what I say about that chapter is it's not a recipe, it's a riddle.
Very good. Yeah, it's seemed to me, at least in my perspective, the chapter 2 is as challenging as the chapter habit 1, because it seems to be multiple at once, and doing and having a lot of flexibility to deal with different scales, or even different roles at the same time. So it's like a multiplicity of possibilities in sometimes an encounter with one person. And I think juggling this multiplicity of worlds that you have, within one person, it can be tricky. And yeah, dealing with our own as well, right? So yeah, it seems like the different ways of acknowledging that there are multiple in single occasions, there are multiplicities in single occasions, and being able to identify the best way to deal with the scenario in that specific moment and not another moment. It is it takes, I think it takes a lot of
Yeah,
wisdom and responsibility.
yeah. So many people have told me habit two, which is relating three dimensions. Just checking that I'm not getting my relating in three dimensions is the most complicated chapter in the book. It's dealing with something which is complicated, and I've tried many times to write about it. In other books, I've described it as love, power, and justice. I've taken yet another, I think, more successful run at it in the second edition of Collaborating with the Enemy. But I think for those of us who say we're interested in systems transformation and doing systems work and trying to do it peacefully rather than violently, it's a complicated idea, but I think it's a crucial idea, which is why I've tried over and over to articulate it. And I went back to the beginning, or at least the beginning of my work in systems thinking, which is Donella Meadows, who wrote a very good book. I think it's called Thinking in Systems. And she defines system as an assembly of parts that related in a particular structure that produces a characteristic set of behaviors, sometimes called its function or purpose. So that's a good definition. And the three dimensions of relating correspond to the three parts of that sentence. And so I'll just try to give a very quick explanation because I know this is not straightforward. So you and me, Yasmin, we're both actors in this whole, the whole of this webinar. And we're trying to produce a learning experience and a good video for SI. And so that's one way for me to look at you as a fellow actor, a fellow part of this whole, in this case, the whole of this webinar experience. Of course, we're part of other wholes. I'm part of a family and a company, and you're part of the Bristol Hub and other things I don't know about. So that's perspective one. Perspective two is we're parties in ourselves. You, Yasmin, have objectives, needs, ambitions, identity that I actually hardly know anything about. We spoke once before. But if we're going to collaborate, I need to understand that you're not just part of a larger whole, you're a whole in yourself. And as I often point out, when Christiana Figueres talked to me about COP, COP stands for Conference of the Parties. It's not just a collection of people all trying to figure out how to reduce climate or avoid catastrophic climate change. It's a negotiation among parties, signatories to a UN convention. And quite aside from the festival that is COP of all kinds of people and all kinds of meetings, the real game of COP, or the big game of COP, is the negotiations among the parties who have different interests and positions, etc. And she's very eloquent about that. And the third way we're relating, Yasmin, which is not very visible to me, is you and I are related. We're fellow human beings. And, even now, you're nodding and I feel, okay, we're understanding each other to some extent. We have some connection that's different from us as actors and us as parties. We're in some distant sense relatives. And part of how I'm talking to you right now, as I look at you on the screen, is as a fellow human being. And the point of this very difficult to understand habit two is that all three are true and all three are necessary. And most people focus on only one or two, and that's not adequate.
So trying to together, all these three in ways of relating. It is something that I was really thinking about a lot, and mindset. It's almost like a mindset shift when you are genuinely curious about the other person, and you don't come just prepared to respond, right? You are
Yeah.
here present, and something that it can be quite challenging in, I think, in a context where we need to be right, or in a context where we need to know everything, and we need to have the right answers, right? And how we learn that. And this is even something that you mentioned, I think, in previous interviews about your previous book, Collaborating with the Enemy, that it's very important to first connect with the other genuinely and trying to understand where the person is coming from. And it seems to me like the first habit and all the other habits all together in this book, it's an invitation to learn genuinely about ourselves and then acting more responsibly in the world. So it seems like the two, there's a bridge there that
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense to me. And so a follow-up question is, why do you think that it's so difficult to listen to the other and so difficult to be vulnerable um to sometimes say, I don't know, I have no idea, and yeah, go from there, from the unknown of
Yeah.
clear of expectations in a way.
Yeah. So thank you. And I'm really grateful to you for having read the book so carefully. It's a pleasure talking to you about it. So just to go back a little bit, because you mentioned something, sorry, in your previous question that I think is important, but probably isn't clear to people, which is we're always dealing with multiple holes. That's what makes it complicated. I'm not dealing just with Yasmin and this webinar. There's Yasmin and the hub, and what do they want, and what's Diana's story, and what's Bruce's story, and what holes are they part of, and I have holes I'm part of, and and so it's not just optimizing one hole. And as I've said in other contexts, when people say let's focus on the whole, that is a nonsensical and manipulative request. It's saying focus on the whole that matters to me. Uh, could we all turn on our cameras because I want to have a good webinar experience? Well, some people have other things going on in their lives that whatever that make that a not a acceptable or reasonable request just to take. Um, and what you say about curiosity is crucial. That's the key of radical engagement, or a key: humility and curiosity. But again, just to repeat the three dimensions, I can be curious about you and your role, your role as an actor in this whole that we're both part of. I can be curious about you as a whole and yourself, and what's your story and what are you trying to do. And I can be curious about you as a fellow human being. But I think you raise an important question, which is, or I was trained to be an expert. As all of my training uh, at university and in my first jobs was to calculate and articulate the right answer. And I go further than that, and I say the theory of change I was implicitly taught is smart people calculate the right answer, they convince the authorities to accept it, and then the authorities implement it. And that's not impossible, but that's not how most things work. Or let's say it's a limited model, as many, many people have pointed out, including this old article about wicked problems versus tame problems, which is, I think, from 1974. So, and those of us who are consultants or academics or facilitators, these are expert roles where we're paid and our professional identity and livelihood are based on, at least in part, on an expertise. So that's pretty hardwired, or so I think that's one thing we're dealing with, that the expert model, the authority model, uh, that's a dominant model and becoming in a way more dominant these days. So sometimes I think people like us are swimming against the tide. But the other reason it's difficult is because I said to an African American colleague of mine when I was first starting this book, I said, just starting it, but I think the key is opening, because I'd used the word opening in my very first book, Solving Tough Problems, an open way of talking, listening, creating new reality. I said, I think the key is opening. And he said, Adam, don't tell me to open. That's a dangerous thing for me to do. So it is, well, for different people in different ways, but I'm a whole in myself. I have an identity and a bodily integrity. If I open myself up imprudently, I I may suffer a little bit of harm, or I may be killed. And so I don't think that. So why is it difficult to be vulnerable? Because it's dangerous to be vulnerable in certain circumstances. And it's yet another example of focusing on the larger whole and ignoring the whole of each person. It's why Martin Luther King said, "Power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic." And that was how I got started on this whole love, power, justice investigation. So, and I think in the systems world, now, if I can be critical about our community, as I think I'm part of it, the focus is primarily on perspective one, how people and institutions are parts of larger wholes. That's the emphasis of systems thinking, and I assume of SI. And it's true, but it's only 1/3 of the truth. And if you just focus on that, you'll be sentimental and anemic at best, and at worst, cynically reproducing of the status quo or inviting people to be killed.
Not a good outcome, is it? Right. So yeah, that is, yeah, it is an ongoing conversation and an ongoing uh, space to come back to being vulnerable enough in some context, but when and how and why it is very
And with
personal.
whom?
And
And with
yes,
whom?
yes. So yeah, I have loads of other questions that I would like to ask, but I will invite the audience to share their questions. And before that, just as a summary of reading the book and so forth, I created this mirror board that basically summarized some of the main ideas of the book for me. But there is a space for people to put their questions and comments and so forth. I will share this here in the chat and see if it's valuable for people. And then I'll open up the floor for more questions. So I need to find my chat again, right? So yeah, here is the mirror board, just quickly going through it. I just found it would be something different to do. I've never done this before and I never shared this before, but I thought it would be interesting to at least try to give a perspective of how important this book can be. It can be digested with time. So just quickly share. And I thought it made me think also, as in each one of these habits, it made me think of values that are underneath or below or accompanying some of these habits. That sometimes it can be, at least in my perspective, it can be a guidance when challenges arise and you don't know exactly what to do. Values could be very important in making sure that at least habit one, acting responsibly, could be a bit less abstract. So, for example, experimenting with a way forward. Maybe adaptation and experimentation and attention are some ideas that we can retain and trying to be aware of once there is an opportunity coming up, or yeah, when we don't know exactly what to do.
Yeah,
So
thank
just
you.
also put
Yeah,
some
thank you for
quotes
doing
here.
that.
No worries. I put some quotes here of the book in case that to me illustrated generally the main idea of the book. But yeah,
Thank you.
you can take a look, everyone, in case you want and need this summary. But this is just my perspective. And now I want to hear your
Thank you.
perspective. Please bring up your questions, and Carl.
Yeah, maybe stop sharing, Yasmin, so we can see people again.
Great. Thanks, Yasmin. Thank you, Adam. Yeah, super great conversation so far. The first question came in from Bruce about incentives and hierarchies. Bruce, would you like to unmute yourself and ask Adam directly, or I can? Oh, wonderful.
Sure, thank you. I appreciate this opportunity. I want to preface it. I wanted to see the book, and I had to pay my local library to buy it. And they did buy it, and I got to be the first patron that got to have it. So it was worth the huge fee that I paid to have my library get this book. Reading the book is worth it for those of you who haven't. My question, a little bit about me. I sometimes get critical of people like Donald Trump or Putin or Xi Jinping, and I blame them for being these monsters that have huge power and use it in destructive ways. And then I look at myself and I say, yeah, but I do that at times too. I have, I can identify with some of the anger that they get and the incentives that they get for being so powerful. And then there are other people that I blame for being so lazy. Why don't they just get around and do something? And then I look at myself and say, yeah, Bruce, why do you do that? And anyway, so I am one of those, just like the ones that I can blame. The question is, why am I doing that? Why are they doing that? And there's an answer, and that is their incentives. The world, the systems we are in, reward those kinds of behaviors. And what I'm wondering, Adam, is whether you've found any simple keys that might help us shift away from these outrageous rewards that the huge hierarchical leaders and the lazy people are getting for doing things that aren't really helping improve the world. Are there any simple keys you found? I'm searching and I'm interested in knowing if you have any thoughts on what might shift the incentives.
Yeah, let's take a few at a time. Thank you. I've written that down. Yeah.
No worries. Both Diana and Alvin actually had questions around cracks. So Diana, would you like to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you so much, Adam. What a fascinating talk. I haven't read the book yet, but I will be. Yeah, I very much agree with what Bruce was just saying, and I guess my own work at the moment is thinking about us all, right? Everybody is an actor in the system, and I think primarily about the economic system, the global market economy, that kind of forces us to be like sheep, and for most of us to be very blinkered and not even see the cracks. And I guess my question would be how do we help people see that they're in a system that, the narrative that we're hearing doesn't make any sense. It's absolutely full of cracks, and that everyone is empowered to do something differently, really, if they could just get on and do it. And the current system is only the sum total of us all being really great sheeple, you know, and the more people that are not sheeple that actually exploit the cracks and decide to do it differently, the more quickly we'll change the systems. But how do we make people aware of the cracks, and so that they feel that empowerment to act within them? Thank you.
Great, thank you, Diana. And Alvin, you had a slightly different perspective around the cracks. Would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, I think jumping on what you were mentioning, Adam, on acting responsibly, my question was around what's something to consider when deciding whether a crack is something to act on, or whether it's actually noise. I think we had a question in Montreal about separating signal from noise, especially when that crack opportunity feels like it's only limited for a small amount of time. And so we may be tempted to react versus being more strategic and coordinated.
Right. Maybe one more.
Maybe one more, no problems. So Hannah, you had a question about facilitating change with tricky stakeholders. Would you like to pose your question?
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I'm off camera making dinner. Hi, thanks, Adam, for a great talk. My question was really, what have you learned newly from these kind of explorations with leaders about how to collaborate with different stakeholders that don't necessarily get along? I kind of have a feeling that it's a sense of being, a way of being in the world that perhaps maybe we need to sort of learn to take on to facilitate that.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all very much. So let me just try to say what I think I can about these. Yes, the whole point about systems thinking, or the systems perspective, which you all know, is that systems provide constraints and affordances. David Snowden, I find, as part of this, I got around to reading some of David Snowden's work, and I found it very useful. And so this naive idea that we're just in an empty world and we do whatever we feel like doing is that's not how things are. We're part of systems that provide constraints and affordances. The best example I gave a talk in Montreal, my hometown, a few days ago, where I last saw Alvin. And the organizer of the talk gave what I thought was a very clear example. He talked about the transport system in Montreal. So the transport system is vehicles and rules and roads and norms and attitudes and laws and signaling devices that enable people to move around the city. Its function is for people to move around the city. Its characteristic behavior, it used to be that its characteristic behavior was that the best way to get that it was easiest to get around the city by car. And when I was in high school, surprisingly enough, this person who was interviewing me knew the same person. There was a guy named Bicycle Bob Silverman who wanted bicycles in Montreal. And I remember, because I was 17 or 18 at the time, thinking this man was really crazy. Like, how could that be possible? And of course, to make a long story short, if you fast forward 50 years, Montreal is quite a good city for cyclists. So that the system has been transformed in as much as it produces different characteristic behaviors. There's a lot of bicycles, but that required, amongst other things, changes in rules and norms and in physical infrastructure. It wasn't just somebody said, okay, you can all go out now. No, we have bicycle lanes, we have posts. I assume we have fines that weren't there before. I don't know. You certainly have a norm that. So it's a very good example, a practical and visible example of system transformation. So yes, Bruce, the rules that and the norms and the laws and the habits provide constraints and affordances, make it difficult for us to do some things and enable us to do other things. And system transformation, this is Donella Meadows' key point. You can't change the system by changing just one element, one person. Bicycle Bob by himself, jumping up and down. He really did used to jump up and down, literally. Was quite an excitable fellow. Wasn't enough, but he, with many others and with, I guess, changes in the bylaws, I don't know exactly how it worked, and changes in the infrastructure managed to change the behavior of the system. So when we talk about system transformation, I think a very fruitful place to look is how do we change the relationships, rules, laws, policies, habits, beliefs. That's what's involved in system transformation. Diana, I liked your question, but it's also a difficult question. And sorry to pick on your wording, but there's a particular wording that people use a lot, and so I always hear it. And so you said at the end of your question, how can you make people? And another expression that's used in about 100% of the talks I give is, how can we get people to? These are very frequently used expressions in English, and I'm sure I use them myself. Certainly when facilitators meet in the bar, they talk about how can we get people to do this or that. But I think it's a fundamentally problematic expression. And the point I emphasized in my previous book, Facilitating Breakthrough, and I tell a story about an encounter in Colombia where I realized that this is not a helpful mental model, that at best we can remove the obstacles to people doing what they want to do. We can almost never get people do anything or make people do anything. So so as a facilitator, I've shifted my attention to removing obstacles. And I think another part of this is modeling curiosity and openness and willingness to explore cracks. I was on another call about this book earlier today, and there was a guy on the call who I've known for, I don't know, 40 years. He's a very prominent Scandinavian sustainability activist. He has been forever. He's written about it. He must have spoken at 1,000 conferences. And I was very surprised and pleased by what he said. He said, we have failed. We being first person plural. And I thought, well, I agree with you. We have failed, or that community has failed so far. And to recognize, okay, we failed, maybe we're doing something wrong. And maybe we need to, just giving the same speech at conferences you've been giving for 40 years and shouting louder or repeating it stronger. I was impressed that he said that. I thought it was promising that he said that. And I don't know what he should do. I don't know what we should do, but that modeling, that curiosity and openness, where am I wrong? What am I not seeing? Why does this make sense to you? I don't understand it. I think this is important. Alvin, it's a difficult question. How do we decide? I don't think there's a rule for that, how to decide if a crack is worth acting on. Sorry, I've been so many of these talks in the past week, I can't remember which stories I've told to whom, but in one of these talks, somebody said to me, Adam, this thing about cracks, first of all, in your mountain climbing example, the crack is not visible from far away. You can only see it if you get up close. I thought that was a very nice extension of the metaphor. And somebody else said to me, listening to you talk about radical engagement, I think it's like Robert Capa, this famous Hungarian-American war photographer, really great photographer. And he's famous for having said, if your photograph isn't good, move closer. So I think there's no general answer except pay attention to the specifics of the situation. And it may be that the crack is only open for a minute. There's a very strange book, you might not have heard of it. It's from decades ago. It's a really weird book. It's called by a guy named Carlos Castaneda, and it's called The Sayings of Don Juan. Anyhow, very bizarre mystical book, which is allegedly transcriptions of I think a Mexican shaman. But anyhow, there's a lovely expression in that book that Don Juan says, you have to be ready for the cubic centimeter of chance, that it may only open quickly. And if you read the interview with Philip Atiba Solomon, which is chapter 7 or habit 7, you'll see he works on police violence in the United States. He says, people only work on police violence when there's an incident, when something terrible happens. We have to be ready for that moment because that's the time that things can move. And Hannah, you asked about new learnings. When I said I rewrote 90% of the book, Collaborating with the Enemy, it's true. And I really tried to rethink it from first principles. And so there's 4 or 5 big changes in my thinking, but I'll mention just one of them, which I think's the most important. When I published Collaborating with the Enemy, my colleague, Zaid Hassan, whom some of you may know, he lives in Oxford, told me that he really thought it was a terrible title, Collaborating with the Enemy. He said it's crypto-Schmittist. So I had no idea what he meant, and so I ignored him. And when I got back to the book last year, I've kept the title, but I tried to understand what he meant. And he was referring to a man named Carl Schmitt, you may have heard of. He was a very famous German member of the Nazi Party, political theorist, lawyer, who wrote about politics as being about friends and enemies. That the friends are the people you will kill for, the enemies are the people you will kill, and the friends are the people you will die for. And Zaid's point is that this is a very problematic statement, that these are fixed categories of friends and enemy. It's a really very dangerous perspective, but it's a very common perspective. I mean, I see it a lot in all kinds of settings, not just wars, but very ordinary situations. Those people are my enemies. I could never work with them. And the big change I've made in the book, or the big clarification, is to say that this category is that you may have enemies. I'm not saying you don't have enemies. Enemy is defined as somebody who's harming or injuring you. You may have enemies, but this use of the word enemy for so many different situations is problematic. And more problematic is the idea that we can decide in advance and universally who we must work with and who we must never work with. And so I argue in the book, Hannah, this is a big change or a big clarification, that rather than the situation being black and white, the people we can never collaborate with, the people we can only collaborate with, it would be better to look at things in shades of gray. And question is not, do we want to collaborate? The question is with whom, when, why, under what circumstances, all gray. And we may not want to collaborate with our friends because it's not important for what we're trying to do right now. We might need to collaborate with our true enemies. Juan Manuel Santos collaborated with the FARC, his enemies, because you make a peace treaty with your enemies, not with your friends. So anyhow, there's many other examples. So there's many other things in the book that have been changed, but that I was very happy with that clarification and finally realizing Zaid was right and I was wrong.
Awesome. Do we have time for one last question?
We have a few more questions in the chat, and Paula's popped her hand up as well. So, Paula, would you like to ask your question, or was there any follow-up that you had for Adam's comments?
Yes, actually, thank you, Adam. It's nice to hear your voice again. I followed him on a few different webinars of this sort around the same book, and it's a pleasure to be able to go deeper and deeper with every conversation. That sort of brings me to the question that I have, that's a follow-up on what I've been hearing thus far. And what I've been hearing and paying attention to was this notion of urgency and signaling, and the signals that sometimes will disappear if we don't act on them right away. And so, I mean, given the fact that, Adam, I think you're trained as a physicist, and physicists now have sort of debunked this notion that time is a real thing or not. I think we need to give more attention to what we pay attention to, and not so much the time the urgency of the time that's required. And so my question is, in response to this notion of really how urgent is urgency? If we know that there's a problem, if we've noticed the crack, even if the crack disappears, we know that the problem is still there. We can go back to it, revisit it, search for the crack again somewhere else in the universe. And so when we work with unlike others, it's like searching for those cracks. It's trying to figure out how is it that we're able to attune in ways that are helpful to our common interests, but then, rushing to align solutions without really giving time to building trust, sometimes it's problematic, because people that are unlike us will have different worldviews. And so my question is, you solve that quandary about time. Time sometimes is take a long view.
So I haven't solved the quandary, and just to be fair, I wasn't a very good physicist, which is why I gave up after my undergraduate. So what you're talking about was beyond my studies. In the interview with Christiana Figueres, which is chapter 2, she says, I am both impatient and patient. So it's a paradox. And I don't know, paradoxes don't have solutions. And she's saying, of course, that climate change, which is her primary interest, is urgent, and the longer we wait, the harder it gets, and things take time. I repeated that statement when I first met Philip Atiba Solomon, this person in chapter 7, who works on police brutality, particularly against Black and brown people in the United States. And I said, well, climate change is a really urgent issue. And he pulled me up very short and said, for the mothers of young Black men in the United States, it's also an urgent issue. It's whether my kid's going to get killed tonight. So don't tell me this is not urgent. So it's a paradox, or it's a paradox. We need to be impatient and patient. And especially when we're working with unlike others, as you said, we're searching for cracks. We're doing it not because we feel like working with unlike others or working across difference, but we think will allow us to advance further. And yet that takes time. I used to have a colleague, the late Bill O'Brien, who said it takes 9 months to make a baby, no matter how many people you put on the job. You can't make it go faster just by trying harder. And a lot of multi-stakeholder work is like that. So I don't have a solution. It's a genuine paradox or dilemma.
Thank you for
Both
saying
are true.
that. I think sometimes we live in contexts of urgent times, and everything is a fire that needs to be put out. And I think that it's important to recognize when it really is a fire, and it will, harm many lives. And sometimes when we need to take the time, and it's important to take the time to build trust.
Yeah, and that's why I talk about persevering and resting.
Yeah.
Yasmin, I know you want to close. I'll just say one last thing, which is I'm trying to get the word about the book out there, and I would really be grateful. I appreciate, it's a request, if you could share the news in your network and social media. That would be a big help at this juncture.
Yeah, of course. And yes, get the physical book, everyone, because it's great to have the physical book, and tell your friends and families and pets and everyone. So yes, it's been a wonderful an hour and a half. Been so quickly now. Thank you very much, Adam, for all your insights and your constant thought-provoking comments and answers. And yeah, it's great to have the opportunity to talk to you beyond just reading a book. And yeah, thank you again, everyone, for being here and for your wonderful questions. Yeah, let's continue with the good energy, right? And close off this session. So
Thank you.
thank you very much. Just moving ahead, we have our next interview coming up with James Stotch, talking about his new book, 55 Minutes. And there you're going to have loads of tools, systems, tools, and he's going to bring his expertise on using some of these tools and context and so forth. So very exciting one coming up. So here's the QR code, but all of this is in the Systems Innovation website as always. And lastly, this is the Bristol Hub. Thank you very much for joining another great interview, another great book interview. And yeah, hope to see you next time. And without further ado, I'll say goodbye. Thank you again. And we see and connect with each other on the Systems Innovation Network. Right. Take care. Have a good evening, morning, or afternoon.
Thanks,
Bye.
Yasmin.
Really good. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.